sufficient amount of time have been called bullshitters at some point in your life. Either because you're evading some sort of answer. Say, for example, when we were kids in school and we did a math problem, and a math professor would caught us evading a very direct answer. Those people would say, "Well, stop philosophizing."
I'm tired and weightless, unconscious as we cry.
So my claim is that in the social context, for a lot of people to say you're philosophizing pretty much means you're bullshitting. And the words are often, in this kind of colloquial context, are interchangeably used. So this is a kind of a social demand for justification when people are asking us philosophers, to kind of justify ourselves that we're not bullshitting. And it's a very demanding thing in a lot of cases, because for a lot of people, the questions that philosophers are dealing with are bullshit to begin with. So if you're dealing with metaphysics, people will say, "Well, that doesn't earn like anyone's attention apart from you guys, like talking to each other, so that is bullshit to begin with," or it's not measurable in some sort of sense of social utility, therefore you guys are producing bullshit. Now that's very hard to deal with, and pretty much all philosophers at some point in their lives just kind of do away with that kind of criticism if it's not affecting their livelihoods, their jobs and whatnot. What is more interesting, I think, is this philosophical demand for justification, because in a lot of cases I think philosophers deem that some other philosophers are bullshitting, they're producing something which is lacking in value, and they denote it with the particular word bullshit. And this debate has started about 20 years ago, well, even earlier when there was this mention of humbug, which was the earlier denotation for bullshit. And what started with this essay from Harry Frankfurt called On Bullshit. Now, there are different ways in which you can approach the subject, and I've mentioned here 3 aspects of bullshit. One being the bullshit, the product. So what kind of form does bullshit have to call it bullshit? The other one being bullshitter, the producer. So what are the mental states behind the producer's? What is the producer trying to achieve? So what are his mental states behind creating bullshit, and the bullshitting in the audience? So what makes us kind of liable to the creation of bullshit? Now, I started this topic not merely to kind of set traditions at odds, because that's not the point at all, or to show that, well, basically, bullshit is very prevalent in philosophy. There is a lot of bullshit. There are different kinds of bullshit in different traditions, and it runs across traditions as well. But the bigger problem is that we're sometimes drawn into bullshit, because bullshit has, well, in a lot of cases, has some sort of aesthetical quality, and we are either passing it on as we hear it. We're not, too rigorous in our kind of dismantling of what we just read or what we just heard, and we kind of start being producers at that point. Now, the commentators on bullshit kind of start from this Oxford English Dictionary definition, and they concentrate on 2 different entries of what bullshit means. One is that it's nonsense or rubbish, and that kind of refers to the product of bullshit having ontological primacy over the bullshitter, and the other one being that it's some sort of trivial or insincere talk or writing. That means when the producer is producing it, at first he has to have some sort of intention or idea behind what he's trying to do, and then the thing that he creates is basically pushing people in that kind of direction. So, but the two entries don't have the third one, which is the audience. What kind of audience you have to be faced with in order to make bullshit happen. So the first one, which I mentioned, is the process-oriented approach, and this is the approach taken by Harry Frankfurt, which is kind of the pioneering paper in this topic. And he draws on Max Black's notion of humbug. He said that it's a deceptive misrepresentation, short of lying, especially by pretentious word or deed, of somebody's own thoughts, feeling, or attitude. Frankfurt pretty much goes in line with what Max Black said about humbug, so these are kind of synonyms in their regard. But the essential part, so you say that Frankfurt's position is essentialist about bullshit, that all bullshit has some sort of common denominator, and Frankfurt says that it's unlike the liar, the bullshitter is essentially unconcerned with facts and truth. So whatever he says, he doesn't really care what the truth behind his statements are. So for example, a July 4th orator might say, "Our great and blessed country, whose founding fathers under divine guidance created a new beginning for mankind. Now, the orator here doesn't have to be engaged in matters of truth relatedness to this claim at all. He doesn't care whether the claim he's making is truthful or not. What he cares about is this kind of aura he creates around himself, the impression that people have of it. So Frankfurt also mentions this example of bull sessions in which, say, you're with a couple of friends and then you're talking about politics and religion and sex, and nobody really cares what the other people find to be true. Nobody cares about commitments, what you actually believe in, but people just kind of toss out ideas. And it's a kind of a context, a kind of a frame in which not everything you say has to be taken seriously. And we all kind of do that, like in coffee breaks, for example. We just kind of, blurt things out just to see what the reaction will be, usually for humor, and that's kind of nice, and we enjoy that. But we do kind of bullshit. There doesn't have to be any kind of commitment in it. So the essence is the essence of bullshit for Frankfurt is that truth value of his statements are not important to the bullshitter. Now there's an important objection here, and we come to this opposite approach, which is a bullshit-oriented approach, which concentrates on the form, by Jerry Cohen, who says that the bullshitter is immaterial. And he says that that he's more interested in what we find in the academia a lot of times, when people are just kind of, I will refer to this as obscure bullshit, or obscurantist bullshit. When people kind of try to create these obscure clouds, when they're not being particularly clear about what they need to say, when they're not particularly precise. Cohen claims that this kind of bullshit does not really correlate with Frankfurt's bullshit. So Frankfurt's notion doesn't really capture all of the things we might think that belong to this family of concepts. These are kind of counterexamples that Cohen introduces, pretty much saying that the essentialist approach that Frankfurt uses is inadequate. So say this is an example. Certain authors in philosophy build up intricate bubbles around their claims, which once pop expose the claims to be base and trivial. But the importance here is that people who do make these kind of obscurantist clouds, they can be concerned with truth. They might try to say something particular and specific about a particular subject, but they might find that they have to wrap it up in different kinds of wrappings in order to make it appealing for others. So the importance here is that the important point here that Cohen mentions is that bullshit has ontological primacy. So it's quite possible that when any of us is uttering something, we can create bullshit without intending to do it. So something might be verbose and silly and doesn't make a lot of sense, and Cohen thinks that this is bullshit. But then he makes this distinction between act bullshitters and victim bullshitters. Act bullshitters would be those that really want to create bullshit, and victims would be just people who create it unintendedly, and he treats them as one and the same. As this is what I'm opposing, so I'm kind of between the two tracks that Frankfurt and Cohen are using. So this is the four general features of an obscurantist bullshitter. So why people who do have concerns with the truth, who do have concerns with saying something meaningful, still might use some sort of obscurantist cloud, and this is something we do a lot when we want to embellish our texts, when we have very trivial claims and want to build something big around them. It happens all across the board. It happens in society. It happens in philosophy and any kind of academic field. So an obscurantist is a philosopher who does one or several of the following things. He may intentionally obscure his claims for pose and velocity, which may bring about an air of wisdom around the obscurantist. He can obscure his claims because they're trivial. He can obscure his claims to cover up weaknesses and inconsistencies. And he may fail to acknowledge the demand for clarification. So the main advantage of Cohen's approach is that Cohen shows that there are counterexamples to Frankfurt's essentialist definition. And the main advantages of Frankfurt's approach is that there does seem to be something essential behind the mental states of the producer, because there does seem to be a difference between those that create bullshit, meaningfully, that are deliberate producers of bullshit, and those that merely just kind of hear it and then they repeat it, or they're raised in a particular tradition where this is kind of abundant. And this brings us to obscurantism, which is something I think Cohen means the most when he talks about this unclarified and clarifiability of the things that are produced. So obscurantism is this idea that that there is a move on behalf of the speaker who is accused of setting up a game of verbal smoke and mirrors to suggest depth and insight where none exists. So it's an idea that you have something to say, but you are, say, unsure of what kind of impact it will have. So you kind of try to put it into a nice wrapping. One which is usually obscure and one which will kind of give you the air of saying something profound. So the suspicion is that the obscurantist does not have anything meaningful to say. See, he may have something meaningful to say, but it might be kind of base and might be already kind of repeated from something someone else has said already. But you either want to give it an air of originality or an air of profundity or whatever you're aiming at. So usual methods of obscurantism might be like empty signifiers, so concepts without descriptions and without any kind of rigor, any kind of clarification, neologisms that aren't defined, noun and adjective clusters, attributes without objects, mystical usage of capitalization, and abundance of passive language, unidentified subjects, and so on. So Bukens and Udruge, who wrote that paper on obscurantism, which I'm dealing with here, who kind of described these methods, named the following example. Is they deal with the other in Lacan. They think that Lacan is an obscurantist and say, well, the way in which Lacan is using the word the other might kind of relate to any kind of signifier. It might be, your mother, society, the matrix, like in Zizek, or so the other might kind of encapsulate any kind of thing. So they mentioned this example as an example in which the other has this kind of property. Say, between the phantasmagoric and the speculative stands the real. It tells us that ethics never dealt with one important phenomenon, morality. That means that it historically dealt with what was the will for power. Beneath all the layers of the states, the other presents to us as a mere medium through which the empowering of the first flows. Everyone is the first and everyone is the other. We can conceptualize the other, at best, as a mere object that takes the short end in the contact with the first. Everything else is romantic poetry. Now, believe me when I say that I'm not taking this out of context. That's the wider text, and I think Bukens and Udruge have as well. So, like in every single one of these sentences, we might ask for clarification because they're not clear enough as they're not clear enough on their own. And there's a lot of these kind of methods that they mentioned. So attribute clusters, attribute without objects, neologisms that aren't really bent down, categories which kind of are very wide and broad that don't really touch upon a particular thing. So Udruge and Bukens also say that there are different kinds of immunizing strategies which the obscurantist uses, and they don't mean to say that these positions that are mentioned here, like radical relativism and social constructivism, are wrong. They merely mean to say that an obscurantist will try to isolate the things that he's saying, that he's being criticized about, by invoking these ideas on a very kind of surface level. So radical relativism saying, I'm speaking in one context, or I'm speaking in one paradigm, you're speaking in another, and they're not compatible. Similar with social constructivism. Or there might be logical fallacies. These are kind of less controversial. And as the audience, we sometimes spend a lot of time with obscurantist readings, and there are certain cognitive biases that come into play here. So if you're reading something for a very long time, you will assume that it's not meaningless. If you're doing something, if you're adding certain meanings where there is only little meaning, people say that this is kind of a lost version. So if you spend a lot of time and you find something, you find it very important, even though you could have extracted that from somewhere else. But there are two problems with my view in general. The one is that we still don't seem to have an essentialist property about bullshit. We still don't seem to find something that would pin all bullshitters down. We might say that they all try to deceive, but it doesn't. That seems to be very broad because people tend to try to deceive us in different ways. And the other thing is being raised in an obscure tradition. Sometimes, for some people, it might not be available to kind of to opt for a more precise and clarity-based type of writing. The important distinction that I want to make from Bukens and Budry, they pretty much say that everyone who creates obscure philosophy is an obscurantist. I don't agree with that. Obscurantist philosophers are only those that intentionally deliberately try to create some sort of obscure philosophy, while those people that are merely obscure might create obscure philosophy for any kind of reason. Either because sometimes when we're writing, we're kind of lazy, we like certain aesthetical properties that, that have primacy over clarity, because clarity sometimes just seems dull and boring. And some people just kind of pass on things that seem valuable to them. So it's a different kind of moral fault. Obscurantists, when they make this moral fault, they willfully try to deceive. The merely obscure are just sort of careless about what they do. This, of course, creates the difficulty of not being sometimes able to tell between the two, because if you just run into obscure philosophy, you can't always track down whether the person who's created obscure philosophy really willfully tried to deceive you, or is merely just passing something else. So this is not a kind of witch hunters might not be satisfied, because this way you can't really tell who was an obscurantist and who wasn't. But you can track down certain things in order to invoke appeals to clarity. So there are two major objections, I think, to the general obscurantist position. The position about avoiding obscurantism. The first one is the relativist objection, and that simply says that obscurity is in the eye of the beholder. So what's obscure to me doesn't have to be obscure to you, and obscurantism cannot be bent down. Now I think that, sure, for some people, certain things don't have to be that obscure, for others it might, but I think it's pretty obvious that certain kinds of writings are more obscure than others, and certain kinds of writings are willfully more obscure than others, and some people are simply just aware of that. So if you're reading Frankfurt is definitely more simple than Hegel. This doesn't prove that Hegel is an obscurantist, it just proves that he's more obscure. And I think that there's nothing controversial to kind of place that into conflict. And the other is being raised in an obscure tradition, and in my presentation I wrote more thoroughly about this, but I'm just going to mention it now. So it seems that the guilt of omission for people who haven't had the appeal to clarity available, their guilt of omission isn't as bad as, say, a person who does know that you have to strive towards being precise and clear in writing, but you just don't do it. So that kind of carelessness does seem to be more kind of blameworthy. Okay, so I'm going to stop here if you have any questions. I think I ran past my time anyway, pretty much.
Znači, ja imam veze sa istinom vrijednošću onoga što se govori, dakle u odnosu sejatora i onoga o čemu se je. Onda se stvarno čini da ne može biti u ušima onoga ko sluša sranja, s obzirom da to nema veze sa njim. Mislim, ono što je za mene sranje, je za mene sranje koliko nemam interesa da to bude istina. I sad nema to veze da li svi ostali misle da to sranje ili ne misle, to sam u sebi je.
Ja sam spominjao taj bullshit feed, taj audience faktor, zbog toga što se određena vrsta bullshita, i obskurantizam nije jedina vrsta bullshita, postoji, tehnički jezik također može biti bullshit, ako se ispod njega skriva nešto vrlo trivialno. Moramo znati s kakvom publikom imamo posla i ko će čitati ono čemu govorimo. Dakle, ja mislim da svi mi imamo na neki način, da smo podložni recimo estetici teksta, kao nešto što nas neki recimo navodi da li nekakav tekst čak ako su njegove tvrdnje nikakve, nekonzistentne, trivialne ili što već. Dakle, de facto sam samo upotrijebio kako bi ukazao da je to nešto što smo svi osjetili, na neki način podložni smo to.
Možda možemo gledati obskurantizam kao nekakav način istraživanja novih ideja, povezuješ riječi koje nisu samo po sebi jasne, rečenje koje su u tom trenutku jesu obskurne, ali možda negdje odvede u nekom trenutku. Znači nešto što je danas jasno možda baš bilo obskurno puno prije i možda bi se prije klasificiralo kao obskurantizam, pa opet kao sa prelaženjem u mainstream.
Ne znam baš, mislim da to igranje riječi, da li to nekog vodi. Ne, mislim da ako uvodiš nekakav neologizam, da je stvar odgovornosti prema tom čitatelju i prema sebi u ostalom da pokušaš razjasniti tebi kako treba. Možda ga nešto dobro razjasniti, možda će ljudi imati dojam da su ga dobro razjasnili, iako imaju puno analogisa, ali da, mislim da je to odgovornost pisca.